let's get it started here in chapter 9 with a kind of a lecture style video. I've got some terms, some concepts that I want to present to you before we really get kind of blowing and going in with doing some demos of this. And we're going to break this down into a couple of different segments. So we're going to talk about the basics of the ETL process, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about data quality. So we're going to kind of bounce around between lecture and demo style videos in this chapter. So just kind of a reminder, this is the scenario, as I mentioned in the last video, that we're going to work with. So here are the OLTP sources. This is the databases that our users are writing to. They are reading and writing data. This is what serves our website. It serves our ticketing system. It serves the patient records, whatever, right? This is what your normal user is working on. And then we will have next door, we have our relational data warehouse right here. So this is our role app. And this is going to be on a SQL Server 2008 system. And then we're going to have where analysis services comes into play. Here's our multi-dimensional OLAP, which is analysis services, and we're exposing a cube. And then the other one over here is just, clients right here. So this would be our client, right? It could be a report server, it could be individuals, whatever. Okay? So this is what we're going to work through here as we talk about the ETL process. Now, for now, I only want to focus on the very highest level of ETL. Now, you should remember from chapter 2, ETL is extract, transform, and load, right? We want to just talk about loading the data from the sources into the relational data warehouse. Okay? That's all we're going to focus on. Okay? We're not going to focus on data quality. We're not going to focus on processing the cube. We're going to get to those as the chapter sort of develops. So keep it kind of high level for this in the next couple of videos here. Now, you will be using SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, to do most of your ETL. I find it probably such a configurable tool that because it ships with SQL Server, anybody that uses SQL Server is probably going to use it for their ETL tool. Now, it can do a lot of things. It's not just an ETL tool, but that's what it was designed for, and it is excellent as an ETL tool. Okay, so that's what we're going to use it for. But it is a complex beast. This is not the area for me to teach you about SSIS. I'm going to teach you some of the basics about what the ETL process is, how to get started with SSIS as an ETL tool. But understand, I'll give you an example. The predecessor of SSIS was a technology called Data Transformation Services, DTS for short. And I wrote courses on DTS. I taught classes. I worked with DTS from before when it was the Transfer Manager, even its predecessor. And when SSIS was introduced in SQL Server 2005, it took me almost a year before I was comfortable. We're not talking about a minor little bolt-on to SQL Server. We're talking about a first-class citizen here. This is a serious piece of software, and you can't just learn it in 30 minutes. So this is an analysis services course, and my goal here is to teach you analysis services. And sometimes we have to kind of take detours to learn a little bit about everything. But I cannot spend the time to teach you everything that one would need to know about SSIS to work with analysis services. I can't. SSIS is too big. It's too massive for me to do that. We would end up having a 24-hour chapter. And well, that's not, there's a course, okay? Go watch, if you want to learn more about this, go watch course 158. That's the SQL Server 2008 /R2 integration services. Okay. For all intents and purposes, there is no difference between SQL Server 2008 integration services and SQL Server 2008 R2 integration services. So you can, regardless of which version of SQL Server, that's the course that you want to get to. Okay. And I have the link right there as well. So really what my goal here is to sort of swoop in and say, okay, here's what SSIS looks like. Here's the basics. Here's the view of SSIS from 50,000 feet of how to get started. Here is a sample package that you can browse that will load your data warehouse. Ta-da! Okay, at least at this level, that's where we want to be. Okay, just from the ETL process here. Not talking about the data quality or the processing cubes. We're going to talk a little deeper about that, like I said, as the chapter kind of develops. Now, let's get into a few terms before we see the demos and kind of go forward here. When you're working with an integration services solution, you are creating a package. Okay, so the package is what you execute. A package contains tasks, and tasks are executed in a specific order. And you can have multiple tasks kick off at the same time, or you can say this task starts, and when it is complete, then this task starts. And when that's complete, this task starts. Okay? So just think of like a task as the basic unit of work in integration services, and a package is a collection of tasks that execute in a specified order. Okay? So package, that's the important thing, because when you go to your administrator or when you go to do this yourself, you'll say, hey, can you execute that SSIS package for me? You won't say, can you run that SSIS task? The task is inside the package. A package may just contain one task, but you still would say execute the package. Let me run the package. It's just think about it as a series of executables, right? That's what the tasks are. And there's over 30 of the built-in tasks. If you want, you can go out. If the built-ins don't do what you need, there are third-party companies that sell additional tasks, and you can even write your own. Just to give you some of the examples, and we're going to get into seeing this in the next video, but let me kind of zoom in and give us some work right here. See, you can execute other packages. That execute package task allows you to execute other integration services packages. We could do some FTP work, like this is very common. I need to download a file from the mainframe and then load it up. And like my data flow task, this is sort of the foundation of SSIS. This is how your data moves from a source to a destination. You can kind of see the icon. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. Right there, you see kind of how that's supposed to be a green arrow showing you've got a source going to a destination. Right, that's one of your more common ETL related tasks there. Okay? And you can guess what we're going to talk about these. This is going to be kind of towards the tail end of the chapter. We'll get back and talk about these. Okay? Now, here's an example of what a package will look like inside. We can see the green arrows down here are dictating, okay, here's step one. The green arrow says when this is successful, when step one has completed successfully, I want you to go on to step two, which is creating the database. And I know you don't know, or you might know, but this is actually the execute SQL task. So what it's actually going to do behind the scenes is execute some SQL that's embedded within that task. And then step number three, it's setting the database options. And then you can see after that, it's actually going to kick off two tasks when that has completed. This is from one of the sample packages from Microsoft. We're going to take a look in the next couple of videos at those. Now, there are three tasks that you and I are going to work with on a day-to-day basis if we're dealing with ETL. Number one, definitely the bulk insert task. The bulk insert task is one of the fastest ways to load flat files into SQL Server. You know what a flat file is, right? Your flat file, that's a text file. That's maybe a comma separated values file, or a DAT file that's just a text file, right? It's just a flat file there. So the bulk insert task is a super fast way to take data that's stored in text files and load it into a table, like inside your relational data warehouse, right? Now the execute SQL task, the one we saw on the previous screen, this is where you can run any SQL. So like you can hook it up to Oracle and you'll be issuing PLSQL. You can hook it up to SQL Server, you'll be issuing Transact SQL. You can hook it up to Excel 2003 and you'll be issuing Jet SQL. So it's kind of tied to the language that your connection is made. And then you get to create table statements or execute stored procedures or whatever you need to do. We'll see some examples of all of these. The data flow task I mentioned, that's one of the foundations of the whole data warehousing thing. The data flow task is just critical to SSIS. So you're just moving from a source to a destination, and it has the ability to do these transformations that we're going to talk about here. Now, this transformation here, speaking of that, you don't have to do this. You can just copy the data from the source to the destination as is, but some of the times you actually need to transform it. Maybe we have in our relational data warehouse, we have a single column country, and we want that value to be USA in the relational data warehouse. But in Oracle, they don't store it as U period, S period, A period. They store it as US. And in SQL Server, they store it as United States. So what we have to do is during that extraction load, we have to transform that data so that US becomes USA and United States becomes USA so that we have consistency in the data warehouse. Right? It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to your users if they had a drill down element for both US and United States, right? You want a single consistent piece of data that everyone agrees upon in the relational data warehouse. And that's what we'll use these transformations. That's one of the reasons we'll use those transformations. Okay? Now, another type of transformation, you might need to change data types. You might need to change data from a date to a string, for example, from a number to a string, from a string to a number, okay? From a decimal to currency, from currency to a whole number. I mean, there's all kinds of different data type conversions that you might need to work with. You might need to change the case. It's all stored in lowercase. Now you want it all stored in proper case, where the first letter is capitalized and the rest are lower. Or it's all in uppercase and you want it proper cased. You might have to change the collation. Now that's kind of a tricky one here. We're going to talk more about that when we talk data quality a little bit later. The thing about collation, I don't want to get too deep into it. Let's come back to that and talk about that when we deal with data quality. But what we're looking at here, and I know it's probably not so clear, this is the data flow task. So you are actually inside the data flow task. And you can see that we actually have several sources. So we could choose the source to be Excel or a flat file, or here's my SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 or Informix, anything that I could use from an OLTP standpoint. And then here's where I'm going with it. Here's all of the destinations. You can see we can go to Excel or go to a flat file or go to SQL Server or to Oracle. And then what do I want to do with the data during this process? Here are some of the transformations. I just kind of put the little thing down here to show you there are more. Okay? But you can see we can do data conversion, we can map, do data mapping here, we can audit the changes, we can aggregate, kind of again beyond the scope of this course to go through what each of those does. When we get into the next couple of videos, we'll see some of these transformations. So here's the steps. Okay, let's come up with the field guide to performing ETL with SSIS. Right, it's actually only going to be 4 steps that are going to do this for you. 1, you're going to make connections. A connection in SSIS is a reusable object. Many tasks can use the same connection. And many times you will need to make a connection to something and disconnect. Go do something else, come back later, and another task needs to reconnect. So you make your connections to your sources and your destinations. You then will design the ETL. So you will choose where you want to extract, you'll choose any transformations, and you'll choose where to load it. If you then want to continue, you could be finished after step 2. But what will happen if an error occurs, right? So the next step would be designing any error routines that you might want. You might want to retry. Like let's say that you have an FTP task that downloads a flat file and then you load the flat file. What are you going to do if when you try to log in to download the flat file, it's not there? Are you going to try again? Are you going to wait 30 minutes and try one more time? Or do you just completely stop the processing? Okay? That's the kind of thing that you have to deal with. What if you tried to load the data and you had a primary key error? How about this? The last one would be doing some auditing and logging so that you could figure out where to begin again if something bombed halfway through the package, or you could see performance metrics. So that's really pretty much the 4 steps that you'll go through. Obviously, each step has its own set of intricacies and best practices that you'll be working with, but that's really at the very highest level. Those are the 4 things that you will go through. Those are the 4 steps that you're going to go through to build an SSIS package. All right, kind of winding down here. I know this is somewhat long, but I wanted to get all the lecture stuff kind of in one video so that we could get into the demos in the next videos. There could be a couple of different approaches that you could take to loading that relational data warehouse. Now, how about this one? Every time you need to sync the relational data warehouse with the OLTP sources, you just delete all of the data in the data warehouse and completely reload it. So let's say that your users say that once a week they want you loading the data warehouse. Okay, on Sunday you go delete all of the data in the data warehouse, and then you run queries against all of the data sources in the OLTP databases and just reload the whole data warehouse from scratch. Right? Okay, will that work? Yeah, but you're really only talking the smallest of systems that would be able to get away with something like that. Most of the time that you get to when you are using a relational data warehouse, we're dealing with really high priority data. We're dealing with data that is probably fairly large, and something like this doesn't really fly. And it's certainly not a very elegant solution for a large system. Even a medium system would kind of start choking because of how long it would take to run queries against the OLTP systems. Now, another approach would be to say that our data warehouse is the history of the company. We can add and change data, but we can never delete anything from the data warehouse. Okay, well, in a case like that, you'll be performing upserts. Have you heard of that term? The upserts are a very important piece of the ETL process. They're probably not words that, it's probably not a term that you've heard outside of ETL. What it refers to is that when you synchronize with the OLTP, so you're synchronizing the OLTP data sources in the relational data warehouse, there are going to be new rows that have been added in the OLTP system that you need to insert into the data warehouse. Okay, so that's inserting new data. What does new data mean? New data means rows that were added to the OLTP that are not in the data warehouse. So when we sync, we need to insert. That way, at the end of the process, we have that row in both places. Now, then you have the update. We want to synchronize any changes that our users have made to the existing OLTP data. For example, we have a customer and they've just, someone has gone in and updated their address information. Well, we don't want to delete that record from the data warehouse and then only to insert it again. So we want to make sure that at the end of the process, we update the data warehouse with that new address information. It's not an insert, it's an update. So we call it an upsert. It's just a common term, kind of a way of thinking. Now the third option, another approach would be we want to keep the data warehouse as accurate as possible. Okay? And we will do both the upserts as well as deletions. So in other words, that means if somebody deletes a row in the OLTP, we want to go delete the corresponding row in the relational data warehouse. A situation like this recognizes that from time to time people make mistakes, they put rows in that should not have been in, and we're just going to keep the relational data warehouse in sync with the OLTP sources. Now, what I'm going to get into in the next video, we're going to make an SSIS package. We're going to talk about the various ways of performing ETL. And one of the things I'm going to show you is the AdventureWorks Data Refresh sample package. Okay? This actually will build the relational data warehouse based on the AdventureWorks 2008 database. So you're given a bunch of CSV files, you're given a bunch of scripts. I'm actually going to use this in the next couple of videos to show you what a fairly sizable SSIS package might look like, but also just as a kind of a jumping off point for comparing some of the technologies that we're talking about with how they're actually implemented. So I've got the link right there. If you want to pull this up and go in the PDF, PDF will have that link. It'll be clickable at that point. So let's actually do this. Let's go. We're going to do this in 2 steps. We'll go in the next video and we'll just focus on creating the connections. And then let's come back in the video after that and we're going to talk about doing some of the data flow.